Y'all, Wizard101 might be about to drastically change how gear works at max level. So here's the deal. There's a Wizard101 community Discord. The devs be saying things in them. And a few days ago, one of the devs that works on the game, Rapbeard, said something that's kind of game-changing. Basically, they had a meeting. They're going to be adding some new templates into the game, free-to-play gear that's offensive and also gives shad rating. Now, when we talk about shad rating, it might not actually seem like it matters as much as more concrete stats like damage, resist, but I would argue that this is a gigantic deal in both PvP and for the future of PvE. Right, for one, in PvP, the fact that Dark Surge itself exists is a spell that trades a Shadow Pip for 2 Power Pips. This is a gigantic tempo swing if you have a high shad rating against someone that doesn't. So that's a very, very big reason to have shad rating in PvP. And in PvE, as our opponents and enemies level up more and more, they'll come with shad rating. It's definitely at some point gonna get to the point where if you don't have shad rating on your gear, you're just not gonna be able to use your shadow spells. Even in PvE, where shads are literally 1 shadow pip, if your opponent has too much shad rating, you'll never be able to get the shadow pip in time for it to be useful. And there is a gigantic issue with where shad rating comes from right now on all of our gear. One source is from packs, meaning you literally have to spend crowns, but the Wastelander set is the highest utility set in Wizard101 right now at max level. It gives shad rating at basically the expense of block compared to, like, you know, the Reaver set. That's basically the trade-off. And while this is really, really cool and honestly relatively accessible compared to the other pieces of gear that we're going to talk about, it's still only found in a pack. This is probably going to be farmable from a gauntlet boss at some point soon. But until then, this is still essentially pay to win. Now, the second major source of gear that gives shad rating is also relatively inaccessible. We're talking about raids. In PvE, the best robe that actually also happens to give shad rating is a nullity robe. You still have to run a raid and get lucky enough to get this drop. And for PvP, the best gear that gives shad rating other than the Wastelander stuff is all from raids. That's literally just the case unless you're like maybe one of the schools where Stalker gear is good. And that brings us to Stalker gear. This is technically a free-to-play template, but it's really lacking in offense. It's much lower pierce, much lower damage, and it doesn't give crit than most other gear. So if you want shad rating, right now, your options are either to give up crazy amounts of offense, pay money, or sign up for a raid, which is a crazy grind for most people. I think that's created a lot of barriers to entry for PvP. I feel like a lot of people don't even chase after the shad rating stat in PvE at all at this point. I think all of that is relatively unhealthy. So what are they going to do? They're probably going to be adding a template that's both offensive and gives shads. Now, where will this template be found if it is free to play? What I'm hoping is that it's just like the Stalker gear, and if you have the Reaver gear, there's going to be like a craftable alternative. Maybe you can give up a little bit of defense for shads, maybe like a little bit of res, and then you get shad rating on something that looks like the Reaver armor, and you can craft it from this. Hopefully that's the type of situation we're looking at. They've created a really good pity system in Wallaroo where all you need are just some reagents and you can craft anything. And these reagents are relatively easy to both collect and, like, you know, literally farm from bosses. So if that's the way they do it, it is definitely going to be a totally free to play and accessible method to getting shad rating. What I'm hoping is a really big takeaway for the devs from this is that shad rating should not be in gear that's inaccessible in the near future. And what do I mean by that? I feel like this issue with the inaccessibility of this whole ass stat it's not just raids that cause this. I think the beginning of a gigantic series of errors when it came to shad rating was the Burrower gear. Much like the Wastelander gear right now, this was completely pay to win gear that you could get from a pack while giving up a relatively small stat, which is accuracy, in order to get tons of HP and tons of shad rating. I think if they're going to make a template this good, meaning giving up a stat like accuracy that's relatively easy to gain back with things like pets and jewels, if they're going to make a template like this, this should never be behind a pack. This should never be behind a raid. This should be main world gear that's literally slightly different from probably the non-shad variation that gives a lot of damage like the Reaver set. I think that's the only way they can excuse making a template as good as something like the Burrower gear. What you'll actually notice is most of the meta gear right now at level 170 is the exact same template as a Burrower gear, except you have to do raids in order to do it. It's the same template in the sense you give up accuracy, you get shads. There are small variations that with the Hun House set and the Burrower set that I'm talking about here, but this little giving up accuracy for shads template really needs to stop being gate kept behind packs and raids. I think it's way too OP to not be free to play to begin with. So I hope at least one takeaway from all of this is that in the future, after they put this template in, there always needs to be some sort of free-to-play template that competes with other sources to give any stat. It doesn't just have to be shad rating. There shouldn't be an inherent and obvious weakness with just using free-to-play gear if you're just going piece for piece. Like, obviously the best gear set is probably going to be a combination of a lot of different templates, but I could never make an argument for running 2 pieces of Stalker gear in the same way I can make an argument for running 2 pieces of Raid gear, and I think that's a serious issue. As far as another consideration that I really think needs to be on the table, I think we wouldn't even be having an issue about shad rating not being accessible if not for spells like Dark Surge, which they added relatively recently. Now, I did mention this already. I actually don't think this is like bad, like, you know, a bad spell for the meta in the sense that it's OP. I think it offers a really nice alternative to just the original way of PvPing, if you want to call it that, which is just play for the shadow spell. What people used to do for the most part was just play for the shad. Like, they would just go for, you know, an overtime into the shad, maybe a hit and buff into the shad. Every single combo was based around shadow hits. Now, these have become 2 shadow pips, so now the easiest way to string a combo together is no longer just to set up the shad. Now there's other options. Options are a good thing, but I think a spell like this is way too OP when shad rating is that inaccessible unless you do raids or open a bunch of packs. So if they are going to add spells like this, I think they need to look at what stats complement the spell that they're adding and make sure that that is something that's easily accessible across the board, no matter which source you happen to go for. I think this spell single-handedly made it so that 3-piece and 4-piece shads are meta, which I feel like, yes, even if the spell is arguably balanced, that is still pretty damn disruptive, which is, I hope, something that they think about more when they add spells like this. It can be balanced, but still disruptive. I would love to get back to a world where I could actually consider running, you know, gear that gives really, really good stats at the expense of shad rating. It would be cool for strategies to work like that. Currently, that is basically not the case. You either have at least 3 pieces or you're out of luck. All in all, this is a good thing. I think a lot of feedback for a lot of people anyways. I mean, this isn't really me because I've done raids, but a lot of people that don't do it, their feedback is, bro, I'm not gonna do PvP if I can't get shad rating. PvE also needs better and more templates because a big complaint for a lot of people is, why would I upgrade from Aeon to Reaver if it's basically like the smallest difference? Like, literally for Storm, it's just a little bit, right? So maybe another template that gives shad rating would give people a reason to actually chase after this higher level gear. So it could be a good thing for a lot of people that play this game. I think I'm pretty excited because hopefully more people are going to be able to queue up and actually try PvP. But I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on shad rating, other stats that you think aren't as available in free-to-play templates, and let me know what you guys think of the news that they're literally going to be adding this new thing. How do you guys think they're going to add it? I would love to hear all of y'all's thoughts and opinions. Drop a like if you enjoyed, leave a sub if you're new, and if somebody hasn't told you you're awesome today, they doing something wrong. Stay awesome. See y'all soon. And yeah.